So we just read Appendix 1 from The Religion of Man. Now we're entering Appendix 2 as a Platonic dialogue between Einstein and Tagore that actually took place in 1930. It says here a conversation between the two in an afternoon on July 14th, to be exact, at the professor's residence in Kaput. So Declan, you will be Einstein. Dave, you will be Tagore. And if anybody at any point in time feels the need to stop and flesh something out, go for it. If not, just keep it going until the end for discussion. So go for it.
Okay.
Can you make it a bit bigger?
Yeah, I can do that.
Just like zoom.
Like that?
All right. Do you believe in the divine as isolated from the world?
Not isolated. The infinite personality of man comprehends the universe. There cannot be anything that cannot be subsumed by the human personality, and this proves that the truth of the universe is human truth. I've taken a scientific fact to illustrate this. Matter is composed of protons and electrons with gaps between them, but matter may seem to be solid. Similarly, humanity is composed of individuals, yet they have their interconnection of human relationship, which gives living solidarity to man's world. The entire universe is linked up with us in a similar manner. It is a human universe. I have pursued this thought through art, literature, and the religious consciousness of man.
There are two different conceptions about the nature of the universe. One, the world is as a unity dependent on humanity. Two, the world as a reality independent of the human factor.
When our universe is in harmony with man, the eternal, we know it as truth. We feel it as beauty.
This is a purely human conception of the truth of the universe.
There can be no other conception. The world is a human world. The scientific view of it is also of the scientific man. There is some standard of reason and enjoyment which gives it truth. The standard of the eternal man whose experiences are through our experiences.
This is a realization of the human entity.
Yes, one eternal entity. We have to realize it through our emotions and activities. We realize the supreme man who has no individual limitations through our limitations. Science is concerned with that which is not confined to individuals. It is the impersonal human world of truths. Religion realizes these truths and links them up with our deeper needs, our individual consciousness of truth gains universal significance. Religion applies values to truth, and we know truth as good through our own harmony with it.
Truth, then, or beauty, is not independent of man?
No.
If there would be no human beings anymore, the Apollo of Belvedere would no longer be beautiful?
No.
I agree with regard to this conception of beauty, but not with regard to truth.
Why not? Truth is realized through man.
I cannot prove my conception is right, but that is my religion.
Beauty is in the ideal of perfect harmony, which is in the universal being. Truth, the perfect comprehension of the universal mind. We individuals approach it through our own mistakes and blunders, through our accumulated experience, through our illuminated consciousness. How otherwise can we know truth?
I cannot prove scientifically that truth must be conceived as a truth that is valid independent of humanity, but I believe it firmly. I believe, for instance, that the Pythagorean theorem in geometry states something that is approximately true, independent of the existence of man. Anyway, if there is a reality independent of man, there is also a truth relative to this reality. And in the same way, the negotiation of the first engenders a negotiation of the existence of the latter,
Negation.
or negation of the existence of the latter.
Truth, which is one with the universal being, must essentially be human. Otherwise, whatever we individuals realize as true can never be called truth. At least the truth which is described as scientific and can only be reached through the process of logic. In other words, by an organ of thoughts, which is human. According to Indian philosophy, there is Brahman, the absolute truth, which cannot be conceived by the isolation of the individual mind or described by words, but can only be realized by completely merging the individual in its infinity. But such a truth cannot belong to science. The nature of truth, which we are discussing, is an appearance. That is to say, what appears to be true to the human mind and therefore in humans, and may be called mayad or illusion.
So, according to your conception, which may be the Indian conception, it is not the illusion of the individual, but the humanity as a whole.
In science, we go through the discipline of eliminating the personal limitations of our individual minds, and thus reach that comprehension of truth, which is in the mind of the universal man.
The problem begins whether truth is independent of our consciousness.
What we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspects of reality, both of which belong to the superpersonal man.
Even in our everyday life, we feel compelled to ascribe a reality independent of man to the objects we use. We do this to connect the experiences of our senses in a reasonable way. For instance, if nobody is in this house, yet that table remains where it is.
Yes, it remains outside the individual mind, but not outside the universal mind. The table which I perceive is perceptible by the same kind of consciousness which I possess.
Our natural point of view in regard to the existence of truth apart from humanity cannot be explained or proved, but it is a belief which nobody can lack, no primitive beings even. We attribute to truth a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us. This reality which is independent of our existence and our experience and our mind, though we cannot say what it means.
Science has proved that the table as a solid object is an appearance, and therefore that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist if that mind were not. At the same time, it must be admitted that the fact that the ultimate physical reality of the table is nothing but a multitude of separate revolving centers of electric forces also belongs to the human mind. In the apprehension of truth, there is an eternal conflict between the universal human mind and the same mind confined in the individual. The perpetual process of reconciliation is being carried on in our science and philosophy, and in our ethics. In any case, if there be any truth absolutely unrelated to humanity, then for us it is absolutely non-existing. It is not difficult to imagine a mind to which the sequence of things happens not in space, but only in time, like the sequence of notes in music. For such a mind, its conception of reality is akin to the musical reality in which Pythagorean geometry can have no meaning. There is the reality of paper, infinitely different from the reality of literature. For the kind of mind possessed by the moth, which eats that paper, literature is absolutely non-existent. Yet for man's mind, literature has a greater value of truth than the paper itself. And in a similar manner, if there be some truth which has no sensuous or rational relation to the human mind, it will ever remain as nothing, so long as we remain human beings.
That I am more religious than you are.
My religion is in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the universal human spirit, in my own individual being. This has been the subject of my Hilbert lectures, which I have called the religion of man.
That was shorter than I remembered it. So, was there really such a hardcore incongruity between their two positions? What do you guys think? What were they more alike than they seemed, or in their positions, or what were the points of divergence that you think? Who do you think came out on top in this debate? Is beauty and truth existent beyond us?
Tagore introduces the idea of truth as the illusion, though, the appearance, truth as an appearance.
Mm.
I think that's what kind of makes a nuanced distinction. And
so is he saying, is he like a subjectivist in that case? That truth doesn't really have intrinsic meaning, or beauty have intrinsic meaning, or is there something? What do you think, Juan?
No, on the contrary, I think that Tagore is an absolutist, meaning that Maya, once again, illusion is a very bad translation for the Sanskrit word Maya. Okay, Maya means construction of the mind. So there is in the science explaining the reality with the concepts of the mind, with mathematics and so on. But and I would say that it would correspond to Dianoa by Plato. Okay, mathematical forms. That's the highest level of the mind. And in that sense, Maya is not illusion. Maya is simply the construction of reality by the capacities of the human mind. And I think that Tagore, on the contrary, is an absolutist, because the last paragraph is very clear. He said, my religion is in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the universal human spirit, my own individual being. This has been the subject of my blah blah. Meanings that if we use Platonic terminology, Maya would end at Dianoa, okay, the first line of the upper kingdom, mathematical form. And when the universal being, on the contrary, or the universal human spirit, is the upper kingdom of true art, meaning beauty, goodness, and truth. Okay, so what Tagore is telling to Einstein is that your scientific endeavor is perfectly legit, but it's not going as far than the universal human spirit. Okay, that needs to take into account beauty, goodness, and truth. So, but at the same time, I don't think that Einstein is. I think that they don't contradict. They don't contradict each other. I think they think the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Einstein is a little bit being a scientist in the standard meaning of the word. Is a little bit attached to, which once again is not illusion, but construction of the reality with the faculties of the mind, of the human mind. And of course, the highest faculty of that human mind is the Dianoa A, mathematical forms. And Tagore wanted to beauty, goodness, and truth, but I don't think that Einstein disagrees with him. Okay, I think there is two levels of truth: the level of truth at mathematical forms, and the level of, when you take into account the universal principles of beauty, goodness, and truth, what Tagore names the universal human spirit.
I think that Einstein was kind of playing, how do you say it, the devil's advocate, in that he was saying, okay, this is what our modern scientist would say. And I think he's, trying to provoke Tagore to say what he did.
You
I
think
don't
so?
necessarily,
Hmm.
yeah. I think Einstein agrees with Tagore, but he's saying, well, this is what scientists would say to that.
Maybe.
It came across that way to me.
Yeah. I
Einstein
would
is
like to
famous for
read.
having said, oh, just one thing. He did have that, there's that famous quote attributed to him that all I care about is the mind of God. Everything else is details, or something. I paraphrase, So he definitely had an idea that his science was the pursuit of God's mind, which implies a certain subjective. I mean, God has, in that sense, a subjective quality. It's not like there's this dead objective universe of rules, but there's purpose in the question is, I mean, how much was he able to integrate that practically into his world, and when did he say that? Was it before or after this intercourse with Tagore? I don't know any of those things. Sorry, Kwan, I cut you off. Go on.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I think that what you said is in relation of with what I want to say too. At page 224, I would like to read the four replies. I think that is at the core of the discussion. Okay, so Einstein said, so according to your conception, which may be the Indian conception, it is not the illusion of the individual, but of humanity as a whole. Okay, and that's here. It shows that Einstein understands the word Maya. Okay, Maya once again is not illusion, but simply the construction of reality by the faculties of the human mind. Okay, so we have the same faculties in all mankind. And Tagore answered, in science, we go through the discipline of eliminating the personal limitations of our individual minds and thus reach that comprehension of truth, which is in the mind of the universal man. Okay, the universal man. Einstein, problem begins where the truth is independent of our consciousness. Okay, and I think that is the core of the discussion. The problem begins where the truth is independent of our consciousness.
Right.
Okay, and Tagore answer, what we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspect of reality, both of which belong to the super-personal man. Okay, our super-personal man is what he calls the universe human mind, okay, pure consciousness. So, and here, let's not mix subjective and objective. Subjective is the construction of reality with the human mind. That is subjective. But objective is precisely that universal pure consciousness that at the end he calls the universal human spirit. And I think that's the core of the discussion, those two replies, those four replies.
Mm-hmm. I have a thought, but anybody else can chime in before I blather something out. Declan, do you have any? What do you think, man?
Yeah, I feel like I need to read this a few more times to actually get it really down.
Yeah, there's a line in here. So here's the thought that I had in my mind. Not totally. There's a lot packed in. But there's one point where he's describing the realization of the eternal man via which has no limits, right? Via, I guess, this idealized, not even ideal, this maximum. I don't know if that's exactly if he's thinking about God when he's saying that, or if he's thinking about something else. I was thinking God, which has no limits, right? And reconciling that with or finding it within our limited selves, right? And then this brings up again, Dave, you brought up earlier the Kusa problem, which is, how does the finite and the infinite reconcile? So how does something finite measure something infinite? Or the Plato problem, how does the ignorant come to a discovery of something which is true, right? Because you're going into the unknown, and you're always measuring that what's inside of you against that which is outside of you and seeing is there resonance, right? So that's the idea of mind. Is I think it derives from the idea of measuring, philologically speaking. So it seems paradoxical because you can't measure something known with something unknown, or something infinite with something finite, but yet we can make discoveries. It happens, and it happens through a certain process with faculties like conscience and aesthetical judgment, right? Ugliness, beauty, truth, goodness. Like there's all of these faculties that are at play when we're navigating into the unknown before we make a eureka and we become something unknown becomes known, right? There's that transformative aha. And in that sense, I was just thinking to myself, well, what is, when we're using our conscience, I know when I'm using this pen, it's made up of molecules, plastics, all this stuff. I know what the pen is. It has a purpose. But when I'm using my conscience, what is it that we're using when we're using our conscience and our aesthetical judgment? Is it something that is purely within us, or are we actually using something which is actually something that much bigger than we think it is on the surface, right? And I was just thinking about this idea of like the infinite being expressed in all, the maximum being expressed in all of the smallest parts. If you're looking at it that way, right? The whole imprint of the universe is contained in everything. So maybe we're actually utilizing something with it, which is maybe very big.
I think to tie this in, it just dawned on me, it makes sense. Plato's idea of recollection, for example, right? Because Tagore talks about there's no truth that's not a human truth. Plato makes the point that there's nothing that you can discover or know, or we don't actually make discoveries. We can't actually, how can you know something? How can you be looking for to discover something which you don't know, right? Such that even if you did see it, how would you know it's the thing you're looking for? You don't know what it is. So this is where he develops this metaphor of recollection, where anything that you could possibly ever know or discover already has to be within you. Otherwise, how could you identify it when you actually do see it? There'd be no way. There has to be some internal reference for it. And so in this sense, the known is only a special case of the unknown, right? It's something that we become aware of that we just weren't aware of before, but was necessarily always there. And in Cousin terms, thereby, the known is only a special case of the unknown. That's necessarily the case because we can't know absolutely anything. We can't know every single thing about one thing. Had we known everything about one thing, we would know everything necessarily, because where did this thing come from? Well, this thing came from that. Well, where did that thing come from? So necessarily whatever we do know is only a special case of what we don't know. And therefore it's us remembering per se these things, becoming aware of them within ourselves such that now they appear before us outside. So they're intimately connected.
Good thought. Good thought.
I think too that when Einstein said the truth then, or beauty, is not independent of man, and Tagore answered, so it's not independent of man. If there would be no human beings anymore, the Apollo of Belvedere would no longer be beautiful. Tagore answered no. So I think once again, what he said that Maya, the construction by the human intellect, which the highest part is mathematical forms, is a kind of lower truth. But if you need to see truly the beauty, goodness, and truth, you need to go to the upper kingdom. And precisely because you goes to the upper kingdom, that is objective reality. Meaning that the human is capable, because we are what we are, to go to the upper kingdom. And without human beings, that upper kingdom would not have a practical expression on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this idea of Maya from that standpoint, that there's constructs of the mind and there's various levels of these constructs, but they can only take you so far. You know, you have to really go higher still.
Exactly. There is a kind of nominalism or a reification of mathematics, okay? Because that goes to one of the famous questions in science, okay? Is mathematics discovered or created, okay? In the sense that discover, in the sense that we human use our mind, our brain, to create what is called mathematics. But that creation would not have been possible without our capacity to go in the lower kingdom of intellect and to go to the upper kingdom of beauty, goodness, and truth. Okay, so it's a false question because mathematics is at the same time a discovery, because we go to the upper kingdom that we receive graciously by direct experiencing the eternal forms of beauty, goodness, and truth. So we don't really create mathematics. We discover because of our capacity to be in consciousness, but at the same time, we invent it to a certain degree because we will invent the symbols, we will invent the different technical operations related to mathematics. But ultimately, as Plato said, anamnesis, meaning the Greek word for to remember, it's only because we are capable to remember from the space of pure consciousness, those ultimate forms of beauty, goodness, and truth, that we would be capable to create those symbols. So ultimately, it's both. But what is fundamental is our capacity to travel in higher, deeper levels of consciousness, to be aware of the eternal forms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you can imagine that an ancient Greek thousands of years ago looking at a circle and contemplating the relationships that you could explore within a circle and its diameter and radius, you know, might help you. You could look within it and discover these things like different triangles. You could look at, you know, there's so much that could be expressed even, and then, you know, later on you could discover certain trigonometric qualities by looking at sines, cosines, all from the standpoint of, you know, a radius moving around a circle, and there's these relationships that change within it. You can discover the Pythagorean theorem, also all of these things, and over time, you know, leap ahead hundreds, thousands of years later, you've got so many more discoveries that have occurred, but all and the meaning of what you were looking at, what seemed to be the simple triangle, a circle that you would, you know, maybe drawn in sand, all of a sudden you're thinking about it as a conic section, or as you know, Gauss might be looking at these higher this higher complex domain of action, and you start realizing that these shapes are actually projections from a higher domain that you can access through your imagination and your mind, and it's useful, but it's the same quality of experience of somebody like Gauss 2,000 years after Apollodorus, it's the exact same thing that they're tapping into, the same feeling, the same love of truth, the same feeling of it, that sensation you get with that eureka. It's the same thing that happens when you break through from the unknown into the known. So there, it's different in so many ways, but yet there's still something eternal
Mhm.
about the quality of the what's happening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quan, I wanted to ask you a question because I'm still thinking about where Einstein says the problem begins whether truth is independent of our consciousness. Now, we saw how Tagore answered it. Like in my mind, the way I would have answered it, I would have said, what do you mean by truth? Do you mean truth in the mind of the individual man, or do you mean truth in the mind of the universal man, he calls it? Because
Yeah.
I don't think, I think Einstein's provoking it, but he's not really seeing that. And I think Tagore answers it that way. Am I correct in thinking that? Is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, I think you're right because the
Okay.
two are playing together. Okay, I think that Einstein thinks almost the same than Tagore, and I think that they are perfectly capable both to distinguish the truth of mathematical forms, the higher truth. Because the way that he asked the question,
Mhm.
those two were not idiots, of course. Okay,
Right.
so they were playing with each other.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think so. That's why I thought Einstein looked like the devil's advocate. He was
Hmm.
leading them.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
what's that saying? If a tree in the forest falls, but nobody hears it, did it really make a sound? Right? It's the same kind of paradox where, okay, the individual man didn't hear it, so for him maybe not, but that tree still fell. It still made a sound. For universal man, it did. You know, it kind of reminds me of that same type of paradox they use.
yeah.
And I think Einstein's hinting at that, you know.
Mhm.
And let's not forget that this appendix was to a book called The Religion of Man, meaning the travel of the person to the divine. Okay, so the divine man, precisely, is that man centered on universal consciousness, which is the source for all knowledge and all science.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yes, that was in the other appendices. The first one, I forget who wrote it. I wrote down this line. It said, uh, "Love turns desire into service." It reminds me of the same thing because you associate desire with, you know, say the animal kingdom, whereas love changes that into service, which is like in the divine kingdom, that you give a purpose uh, to the desire, which changes it so that it can, instead of just being a desire, it can be like a tool to try to see, you know, truth, beauty, and goodness.
Mhm.
But I wrote that line down. It really stuck out to me. Turns desire into service.
Mhm. Yeah, it sort of gets at the theme of the resolution of freedom and duty as well. You can't have,
Mhm.
yeah, and also the boundless and unbounded too, right? Like the true, to be truly free means you recognize a lawful boundedness. It doesn't mean you're just free to do whatever you want infinitely and engage in any infinite pleasure, but you have to be able to recognize that true, to be able to access those higher domains within you, and that those higher sentiments means that you have discovered and willfully become obedient to lawful boundedness. And you have to want it. If you don't want it and it becomes sort of guilt, then that's not really free either. You know, you might be getting a lot of like good, correct so-called behavior, but you're actually, like Schiller says, you know, you're actually a slave carrying your chains around. And it's actually a very terrible like damage or violence one can do to their soul to be, which is why Schiller despises Kant, Immanuel Kant, so much.
I was reading something that it was around the idea of freedom, where if freedom has no responsibility, right? Just do whatever you want. It's not really freedom. We call it license, right? But real freedom is responsibility. So that freedom's another word for responsibility. So if you wanted a sense of freedom, well, then you should be responsible for yourself. If you wanted more freedom, you could be responsible for your family or your community. If you really wanted more freedom, then be responsible for all of humanity. You know, so it's kind of the same idea in a simpler way, but yeah, the difference between license and actual freedom. Yeah, because real freedom with responsibility, he called independence. So it's the difference between independence and license.
Very Confucian.
Yes. No, or very universal. Okay, because all universal teachings propose the fact that the more you go up in the ladder of pure consciousness, more you will take responsibility, and the more you will be free, because pure absolute awareness is equal to absolute freedom.
Yeah.
And which is the country of license, precisely because license you are the prisoner, or you are the slave of a certain number of vices or of bad habits that you think that you're free, but you're not free. You only imprison certain concepts or habits.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
Which is why the Gorgias dialogue is so good, because he proves reasonably that the oligarch, the tyrant that has the maximum power to satisfy his lusts and even grow new lusts that he can satisfy and punish his enemies, is actually the biggest slave. So that's yeah.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is in the first appendix, when he was talking about the ball, and said, oh, some of them were Hindu, some of them were Muslim. It didn't matter, which I found interesting because, you know, you always read about, you know, the wars over religions, you know, and I was just reading about the Inquisition, you know, and the idea that our religion is the only right religion and anyone else, you know, has got to be destroyed, the infidels. But with the balls, it was, oh, you can be Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter. There's something universal to it, something common to it that you want to look at, instead of, like you were saying, Matt, instead of just looking at the rituals and the structure of it, but actually looking at the content, the thought of the religion, which is universal. It's not separate the way we all, you know, they manipulate religions once against the other over this stuff. But it was, I found that interesting with the balls. It didn't matter. Muslim, Hindu, didn't matter.
I find it. Oh yeah, Dave, go for it.
I was just, having been involved in all sorts of religious debates, or, you know, different people will throw different things out. So I've always thought about, like, you know, how to approach these questions. And last time I brought up the question, like for example, you could have a Christian, two Christians who are pretty much are saying the same thing, right? They're repeating the same literal verses or whatnot. But if you have one who has an Aristotelian conception versus one who has a Platonic conception of the same thing, they're two very different ideas of God.
Mhm.
But we could even go further, you know, like let's say I was talking to somebody who was Muslim, but technically, could you not have a, there are like these check boxes, there are these rules that you have to follow, but technically could a Muslim not be more Christian in their virtues or a Christian more Muslim in their actually carrying the virtues and the good, rather than just saying, well, did you check off these boxes or not? You know, like, is the Christian who maybe eats pork but actually follows the teachings of the prophet, right, Muhammad, in terms of virtue and good and beauty, is he not more pious than the one who maybe, you know, does pray, does follow certain rites, but doesn't actually do the kind of higher things that are required for somebody to be truly spiritually in concert?
Well, I think you're bringing up the example of the Good Samaritan, right? That was why Jesus selected that particular story, because, you know, who was the Samaritan? Well, so, you know, he's telling a story to intervene on something very specific, where these rabbis, you know, going through this dangerous path, see this guy just, you know, he's been robbed, he's on the verge of, he's probably going to die there, and they're all just sticking up. They're good Jewish, you know, pious men. I don't know if they're both rabbis, maybe they're not both rabbis, but anyway, they're both Jews, and they're both being very pious, but they won't help the guy. And I think he's a fellow Jew who's been robbed, and he's bleeding. He is, right, Declan? Yeah. Yeah, and then the guy who actually is a Samaritan, a heathen, is the one who's the best human being, who's actually like, yeah, he feels love, and he's willing to risk his life to disembark from his donkey or whatever in this dangerous path and pick this guy up and help him out. So yeah, I think that touched on what you were saying.
Again, the problem of formalism, right?
Yeah.
They're like, do you check off the right boxes?
Yeah.
But the actual content or substance can actually be very different, especially if you look at intentions, you know, like, why are you doing the right thing? The so-called right thing.
Right.
Why are you following the rules?
I was kind of wondering, you read about these things, and or even the way we're talking about Christianity and Muslims and stuff like that, and it kind of, we don't seem to be mentioning God, and isn't that what a religion is supposed to be? We talk about being good, and even like these what are they, balls? They the core of their religion is to exist, and so I was wondering, where does God fit in that?
I was thinking that too, because I was like, that's a good, it's like, it's great that there's this creative spirit about them, that they communicate in even like poetry and song, and that's great. It's cool. They don't have a caste system, and they don't have a lot of that baggage, and that's great. But then it's like, you're also not you're not really caring at all about posterity. You're not trying to develop anything to leave something to the future, or like pay homage. You know, there's this attempt to live in the moment, which might be doing them a bit of a disservice ultimately in their ability to tap into a deeper, a filial relationship with God. Because I mean, having the spirit is good, but I mean, you to be able to balance it also with something else. yeah, they just seem to have gone in the other direction a little bit much. I found. I don't know. I felt the same way though, Declan, when we were reading that.
I guess.
I would say that
Go ahead, Quan.
it's Matthew said something very interesting, because in India there is an adventure into pure consciousness since many centuries, but that adventure into pure consciousness make trash completely the practical realizations of the human mind. And in that sense, the combination of the finite and the infinite is a little bit too too imbalanced into the direction of the infinite, because that's the big question. What is a good human life? Okay, of course, the human being has a lower dimension, and in that lower dimension you have the intellect, and that intellect is precisely the tool for making society, for making science and technology and so on. And you have the higher dimension of beauty, goodness, and truth. And certain society succeeded to go into the upper trigram or the upper kingdom, but they tend to trash the lower kingdom in that adventure. And I think that the case of the balls is quite interesting, illustrating that tendency. The perfect human civilization, and the key word here is human, is precisely to be capable to be in the upper kingdom, but not trashing the lower kingdom. When Matthew, you were speaking of filiation, giving a legacy, and etc. I think that quite interesting as a remark.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Because leaving a legacy, like you're saying, Matt, to me, it brings out the idea of immortality. That if you leave something behind or something that contributes to, what comes after, is the idea of immortality.
Yes, yes. And I'm happy that you use immortality, because the balls being in the upper kingdom, each of them would be in eternity, okay? Personal eternity. So each of them, for those who are truly living their natural religion, they will be in eternity, and there's nothing wrong for that. But too much in eternity when you're in a human body is maybe not the perfect balance, because you also have a lower kingdom, and precisely that lower kingdom is related to the notion of immortality, of collective legacy.
Yes. Mhm.
I was thinking about the idea as well that it brings to mind of the Phaedo, with it on the issue of, is there a soul, and if there is a soul, then is it immortal or is it finite? And Socrates has this wonderful dialogue and takes the reader through several proofs of the essence of how the mind can demonstrate that the soul indeed does exist and is immortal, and thus death is nothing to fear. And the afterlife, whatever it may be, is something that a good man who's lived his life well should be happy about, So and all of his friends are all wondering, like, you're about to die, you should be more depressed. And he's like, no, it's the liberation of my soul from the shackles of my senses that have been keeping me from my pursuit of truth this whole time, which is the direct connection to God. Um, and yeah, it was just a really wonderful, loving, again, rigorously reasonable proof that, thank God for Plato to write it down, because I mean, Socrates in that sense seemed like a little bit more like a bowel follower, because he never wrote any of this anything down. He was sort of like living in the moment in and doing a great job destroying, fallacious arguments. That was great. But if there hadn't been a Plato or a Xenophon to write any of these things down, then might have easily just petered away in the sands of time. So.
Yeah. Well, when you have a ball, you always need disciples to transmit your legacy. Okay,
Yeah.
the same for the same for Confucius.
Yeah.
Confucius was a kind of ball too, but thanks God he had disciples to transmit his legacy.
Right.
And same for Socrates. So using Platonic terminology precisely, when you have a philosopher king, a good thing to have aristocratic man and democratic man to be around him, because that philosopher king being in eternity will not necessarily take care of his legacy. It will be the aristocratic man, the democratic man around him that will transmit his legacy.
Yes.
Worth restating for people maybe listening online, or Declan, because you bring these terms up quite a bit in your discourse, Quan, but maybe you could just do a quick, efficient recap of the aristocratic man and the democratic man as you understand it and utilize it here.
Yeah. The democratic man is the man motivated by justice and honor. So those are the men who will be responsible to build the city. They will take care of the practical reality, if you want. And the aristocratic man are the man motivated by discovery, inventivity, and creativity. Okay, they are in what Plato dialecticon, or playful exploration. So those men being in the upper kingdom are also have the practical cares for legacy, for practical legacies for future generation. And the philosophy is rather interested in creating virtuous man. So he's more in eternity. He wouldn't have a direct one-on-one relation with people that he would try uplift to the universal awareness, but he would not necessarily take care of the legacy dimension for future generation. So the case of Socrates is perfect. You have a philosopher king interested in creating virtuous man, but surrounded, thanks God, by aristocratic man and democratic man who will take care of the mortality.
Yes.
Yep. Very cool. Well, it's 10:07, guys. This is a very, very good couple of sessions here. I was just looking at my book, and so we have two actually more very short appendices, which I was thinking, when we meet back next week, yeah, let's continue on. We'll read appendix 4 and 5. 3 and 4. Number 3 is Dadu and the Mystery of Form. And the last one, number 4, is Night and Morning, an address in the chapel of Manchester College in 1930 by Tagore. I think that should spark, whatever the content may be, spark, I'm sure, some good qualitative conversation again, like always. And we'll maybe brainstorm a little bit for the next item to read. Cynthia and I were talking a little bit about some possibilities of looking at either Schiller. We spent a lot of time in the East, and maybe we'll take a little journey either through Schiller or maybe through Russia, because there were some Vernadsky pieces as well that I thought were also very interesting and very fitting for the reading group. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, next week we'll continue on the religion of man after all. So guys, thanks again for a wonderful Wednesday night.
Mhm.
See
Thank you,
y'all
Matt.
next week.
Okay,
Bye.
see you next
Bye.
Wednesday.
I'm
Bye.
gonna go take care of the earthly kingdom. I'm hungry. I need to go eat.
Yeah.
Good night, guys.
All right, bon
Okay,
appetit.
good night. Bye.